I didn't realize I had a price tag until my son canceled Christmas 3 days before the holiday. I was sitting at my kitchen table nursing a cup of black coffee while the Oregon rain battered my windows. My name is Diane. I am 68 years old. A widow for 5 years, and until that Tuesday, I believed I was a necessary part of my family. I had spent the morning baking pecan pies, wrapping gifts in silver paper, and preparing the guest room for my son Brian and his wife, Jessica. Then my phone buzzed against the wood table. It was a text from Brian. I picked it up expecting a question about what time they should arrive. Instead, the message was painfully brief. "Hey, Mom. Money is really tight right now. Jess is stressed. We can't afford to host or do Christmas this year. Going to just stay home and sleep. Sorry." I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't call him to argue or beg. Over the years, I had learned that whenever Brian mentioned being stressed about money, it was an indirect request for a bailout. As a mother, my reflex had always been to smooth things over. I replied, "I understand. Rest up. We can celebrate later." I quietly packed the pies into containers, placed the silver-wrapped gifts in a closet, and accepted that I would be spending the holiday alone. I spent Christmas Eve reading a novel and listening to the rain. I convinced myself that it was fine. Brian worked in retail management, and Jessica was a freelance social media consultant. They always complained about their budget, and I constantly filled the gaps. I had already scheduled a $2,000 transfer to Brian's account for December 26th to help cover their January rent. I figured this was just another tough month. But at 8 o'clock that evening, an Instagram notification lit up my tablet. Jessica was broadcasting a live video. I rarely watched her content, but curiosity got the better of me. I tapped the screen expecting to see her in sweatpants complaining about a quiet night. The video loaded, and the truth hit me harder than any shouted insult ever could. The screen did not show a quiet, financially stressed household. The video opened inside my son's living room, but I barely recognized it. The space was transformed by professional string lights, an elaborate balloon arch, and a massive, perfectly decorated tree. Loud jazz music played in the background. Dozens of people filled the room, laughing and holding crystal glasses. I watched silently as Jessica turned the camera on herself. She wore a stunning sequined dress, her makeup flawless. "Welcome to our annual holiday bash, everyone." She cheered into the camera. She panned across the room. I saw a professional catering spread on the dining table, artisan cheeses, shrimp cocktails, and a towering dessert display. Beside the table were 3 large silver buckets packed with ice and premium champagne. Then the camera caught Brian. My son, who supposedly couldn't afford Christmas, was standing near the fireplace, wearing a tailored velvet blazer, clinking glasses with Jessica's parents and her siblings. Everyone was there. Friends, neighbors, Jessica's entire extended family. The only person missing from this grand, expensive celebration was me. I didn't throw my tablet. I didn't leave a furious comment in the live chat. I sat perfectly still in my quiet house, observing every detail. I noticed the branded napkins on the table. I saw the hired bartender pouring drinks. This wasn't a spontaneous gathering. This was a meticulously planned event that cost thousands of dollars. They hadn't canceled Christmas. They had carefully and deliberately canceled me. I recorded the screen. I let it capture Jessica boasting about the spread and Brian laughing with the guests. Then I closed the app, washed my coffee cup, and went to bed. The next morning at exactly 9 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Brian. No Merry Christmas. No apology for the silence. Just one sentence. "Hey, Mom, need that $2,000 for January rent by tomorrow, so it clears in time." He didn't know I had already seen exactly where my rent money was going. I read Brian's text twice, feeling a cold, unfamiliar clarity wash over me. For years, I had justified their behavior, telling myself they were just young and struggling. Now, I saw the mechanics of their marriage perfectly. I was not a mother. I was a financial utility. And it was time to shut the utility down. I didn't write a long, emotional paragraph. I didn't demand an explanation. I simply opened my mobile banking app. I navigated to the Scheduled Transactions tab. The $2,000 transfer for January rent sat there pending for the next day. With a single tap, I hit Cancel. The money vanished from the pending list and settled back into my savings account. But I didn't stop there. My hands moved steadily across the screen as I reviewed every financial bridge connecting my life to theirs. I opened my credit card portal. 2 years ago, I had given Brian an emergency card in my name. I reviewed the recent charges. There it was, $850 at a premium liquor store and $1,200 to a local catering company, all charged 3 days ago. They had used my emergency line to fund the party they used to exclude me. I clicked the button to lock the card permanently, then reported it as lost to ensure a new account number would be issued. Next, I logged into my cellular provider. I had kept Brian and Jessica on my unlimited family plan because it was easier. I scheduled the cancellation of their 2 lines for the end of the current billing cycle, exactly 5 days away. Finally, I opened my text messages. I pasted the screenshot I had taken of Jessica's live stream. Beneath it, I typed a single measured reply: "Stay out of my life, both of you." I hit send, and before the delivery receipt could even register, I blocked both of their phone numbers. By 10 a.m. on Christmas morning, the financial safety net they had taken for granted was completely gone. I knew the silence wouldn't last long. It took exactly 24 hours for the consequences of their actions to collide with their reality. The day after Christmas, I was in my garden pruning the dormant rose bushes in the crisp morning air when a silver SUV sped into my driveway. Brian practically jumped out of the driver's seat before the car was fully in park. Jessica followed close behind, her usual polished demeanor replaced by a panicked, frantic expression. They marched up my walkway, clearly expecting to barge into my house and dominate the conversation. I calmly set my pruning shears down on the patio table and stepped up to my front door. I stepped inside, closing the heavy glass storm door between us, and locked it. I stood in my foyer, looking out at them through the glass. Brian pounded on the frame. "Mom, what are you doing?" "Open the door." "The rent transfer didn't go through and my emergency card got declined at the grocery store this morning. What is wrong with your bank?" I didn't raise my voice. I spoke clearly through the glass pane. "There is nothing wrong with my bank, Brian. The transfer was canceled and the card is permanently closed." Jessica pushed her way to the front. "Diane, you can't do this. Do you know how embarrassing it was to have my card declined in front of everyone? We need that rent money tomorrow, or we'll be hit with late fees." I reached into my pocket, pulled out the folded printout of the live stream screenshot, and held it up to the glass. In full color, it showed Jessica holding a champagne flute surrounded by her family. "You had money for catering," I noted quietly. "You had money for premium liquor. You have a household full of people who can help you with your rent." They stared at the paper as if it were a ghost, the color draining entirely from my son's face. Brian stared at the photograph through the glass, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked back at Jessica, waiting for her to provide an excuse, just as he always did. "Mom, it wasn't what you think." Brian stammered, his voice muffled by the heavy door. "We didn't pay for that. It was a networking event for Jess. We had to host it for her clients." I smiled, a small, weary gesture. I saw the credit card statement. "Brian, you charged the liquor and the catering to my emergency card. The card I gave you for medical bills and car repairs." Jessica's face flushed an angry red. She crossed her arms, dropping the panicked victim act entirely. It is an investment in my business, Diane. You wouldn't understand how social media marketing works. We had to exclude you because my brand requires a certain demographic aesthetic. We couldn't have you wandering around in the background asking questions. But we still need the rent money. You promised. Her sheer audacity was breathtaking, but it didn't spark anger in me. It only confirmed that I was making the correct decision. For years, I had subsidized their illusion. I paid for the foundation of their life so they could spend their own paychecks decorating the roof. A promise is made on the condition of mutual respect, I replied evenly. You used my money to fund a lifestyle you can't afford while lying to my face and treating me like an embarrassment. If your business requires that aesthetic, your business can pay your rent. Brian leaned against the doorframe, looking desperate. Mom, please. We have nothing left in checking. If we don't pay rent, we'll get an eviction notice. Then you better start returning those unopened Christmas gifts I suggested. I turned my back on them and walked deeper into my quiet house, ignoring the frantic knocking that continued for another 10 minutes. I knew they wouldn't give up that easily. They never do when the ATM closes. By the weekend, Jessica decided that if she couldn't control my wallet, she would try to control my reputation. My friend Helen came over for afternoon tea on Saturday and brought her tablet. She sat at my kitchen table, hesitating before turning the screen toward me. Diane, I think you need to see what your daughter-in-law is posting, Helen warned gently. I glanced at the screen. Jessica had posted a long, dramatic text graphic on her social media pages. It didn't use my name, but the implication was clear. It's devastating when toxic family members use financial abuse to control your life, the post read. We are currently facing housing insecurity because a relative decided to withdraw their promised support just to punish us for setting healthy boundaries during the holidays. Please support small creators during this hard time. Below the post was a link to her digital tip jar. Helen looked outraged. Are you going to reply to this? You need to tell everyone the truth about the catering and the credit card. I took a sip of my Earl Grey tea and pushed the tablet back across the table. No, Helen. I'm not playing her game. The people who truly know me won't believe it, and the strangers on the internet don't matter. Instead of fighting a digital war, I took practical steps. I remembered that I was currently paying for a large climate-controlled storage unit across town. It held a few of my old furniture pieces, but it was mostly packed with Jessica's off-season home decor and Brian's expensive golf clubs. I drove to the storage facility that afternoon. I paid for one final month in cash. I filled out a transfer of ownership form, putting the unit entirely in Brian's name, and handed the spare key to the manager. I mailed the primary key to their apartment with a short note unit paid until January 31st. After that, it is your responsibility. I was untangling them from my life thread by thread, and the knot was finally coming undone. As I continued severing ties, I realized there was one major vulnerability left. Brian still had a physical key to my home. He had always kept it for emergencies, though the only emergency he ever used it for was raiding my pantry when they didn't feel like grocery shopping. I didn't text him to ask for it back. Requesting the key would only invite a debate, a negotiation, or a dramatic standoff on my porch. Instead, I opened the phone book and called a local locksmith. By Tuesday afternoon, the locks on my front back and garage doors were entirely replaced with modern, high-security deadbolts. The crisp, metallic click of the new locks turning gave me a profound sense of peace. My preparation proved necessary sooner than I expected. 5 days later, I was in my living room reading when I heard a car pull into the driveway. Through the sheer curtains, I saw Brian walking up to the door. He didn't knock. I watched his shadow as he inserted his old key into the new lock. I heard the metal scrape, followed by a frustrated jiggling of the handle. He pulled the key out, stared at it, and tried again. When the door refused to yield, he finally pressed the doorbell. I opened the wooden door but kept the glass screen securely shut and locked. "You changed the locks?" he asked, his voice a mix of shock and offense. "Mom, what if there's an emergency? I'm your son. You're treating me like a stranger." I looked at him calmly. "Brian, you showed me on Christmas that I am not part of your inner circle. This is my house, and you do not live here. You don't need access to it." He shifted uncomfortably. "We need to talk about the phone bill. Our service got cut off this morning. Jess lost a client because her phone wouldn't ring." "Then Jess should set up her own cellular account," I replied. He realized then that my boundary wasn't a negotiation. It was a concrete wall. Brian's shoulders slumped. He looked exhausted, the polished veneer of his holiday blazer long gone, replaced by a wrinkled sweatshirt. He looked around the neighborhood before leaning closer to the glass. "Mom, please. Jess is threatening to move back in with her parents. We had to empty our tiny savings just to pay the landlord the base rent, and we still owe the late fee. We have no phones. The credit card company is calling about the catering charges you disputed. You're ruining our lives over one party." I didn't let his guilt trip take root. "I didn't force you to throw a lavish party, Brian. I didn't force you to lie to me. And I certainly didn't force you to steal from my emergency fund to pay for champagne. I am simply removing my money from your marriage." Before he could answer, a notification popped up on my tablet on the entryway table. It was an email from Jessica. Since I had blocked her number, she had resorted to my email. I picked up the tablet, opened the message, and read it aloud to Brian through the glass. "Diane," she wrote, "since you maliciously cut off our phones and stranded us financially, the least you can do is pay the remaining $400 balance to the catering company. It's your fault we can't pay them since you canceled the rent transfer. Send a check immediately." I lowered the tablet and looked at my son. She still thinks my money belongs to her. Brian looked down at his shoes, unable to defend her, but too passive to correct her. "You have two incomes, Brian. You are 35 years old. You can figure it out, or you can downsize, but you will no longer do it on my dime." I stepped back from the door. "Go home. Manage your household." I closed the wooden door, sliding the heavy deadbolt into place. The illusion they had built was crumbling, and the gravity of their own choices was finally pulling them down. Weeks turned into a quiet, beautiful month. The silence in my house, which I once feared would feel lonely, instead felt incredibly light. There were no more sudden phone calls demanding emergency funds. There were no more passive-aggressive texts from Jessica about how I needed to buy better brands of snacks for their visits. I sat down with my financial ledger and reviewed my budget. For years, a significant percentage of my retirement income had been quietly funneled into Brian and Jessica's lifestyle. Without their phone lines, their rent subsidies, and their emergencies, I had a substantial surplus. I called Helen over for coffee one bright Tuesday morning. I slid a glossy travel brochure across the table. "I booked it," I announced. 2 weeks in Alaska, a balcony cabin on the cruise ship. Helen beamed, clapping her hands together. "Diane, that's wonderful. You've been talking about that trip since your husband passed." She paused, lowering her voice. "Have you heard anything from the kids?" I shook my head. I didn't need to talk to them to know what was happening. In a small town, reality travels fast. Helen mentioned that Jessica had quietly deleted her post about toxic family members after several local vendors publicly commented asking when she would pay her outstanding event bills. Brian had been forced to sell his expensive golf clubs from the storage unit to cover their utilities. Without my credit card to lean on, they couldn't afford the lease on Jessica's luxury SUV. She had traded it in for a reliable 10-year-old sedan. They were no longer posting glamorous photos of champagne toasts. They were too busy working extra shifts to keep their apartment. I felt a brief pang of motherly concern, but I let it wash away. I didn't ruin them. I just let them meet the real world they had been hiding from. By removing my safety net, I had forced them to actually stand on their own 2 feet. 6 months passed before I heard from Brian again. It was a short, carefully worded email that arrived just a few days after I returned from my Alaskan cruise. The crisp, glacial air had done wonders for my spirit, and I opened his message without the usual spike of anxiety. "Hi, Mom," he wrote. "I know we haven't spoken. I just wanted to let you know we moved out of the luxury apartments. We found a smaller place a few towns over that we can actually afford on our salaries. I picked up a second job managing inventory on weekends. Things are tight, but we are paying our own bills. I'm sorry for what happened at Christmas. I hope you're doing well." He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask me to co-sign a new lease. He didn't demand that I invite them over for dinner to pretend everything was perfect. I sat at my kitchen table looking out at the blooming hydrangeas in my garden. I felt a genuine flicker of pride. For the first time in his adult life, my son was behaving like an adult. I didn't rush to the phone to call him. I didn't immediately offer to buy them housewarming gifts for their new place. Healing requires time, and trust requires a track record of changed behavior, not just one good email. I needed to protect my peace, and he needed to prove he could sustain his independence. I typed a brief, sincere reply. "I am doing very well, Brian. I am glad to hear you are taking responsibility for your life and your finances. Keep working hard." I hit send and closed the laptop. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and walked out onto my back patio. Setting a boundary hadn't destroyed my family. It had destroyed a toxic dynamic where love was treated as a transaction. I finally owned my home, my money, and my peace of mind. And for the first time in years, I was truly looking forward to the next holiday.